Story 1. A former social worker shared the story of a young woman who immigrated here from an African country. She worked 3 jobs to help her family members immigrate to the United States and succeeded in bringing many over. Later, she began developing mental health symptoms commonly associated with schizophrenia. Her entire family abandoned her at a homeless shelter with nothing. She had a limited grasp of English, no possessions, no medical paperwork, and was experiencing hallucinations and fear. Story 2. My sister was raped between ages 4 and 16 by my grandfather. She, in turn, raped me when I was 6 to 8. She was 3 years older than me, because she had learned that is what we do to people we love. My grandfather was sentenced to 7 years in prison and was released after 5. While he was in prison, he sent a letter to us, stamped with the prison seal and sent through their postal office. The letter contained 2 pages. The first was pure text, saying how well he had it in prison and that he hoped we could all sit down after his release to straighten out these misunderstandings and become a family again. The second page was a clip art collection with text in the middle. The clip art included a clock, a lion, and a door. The text in the middle said, "The innocently convicted will serve his punishment, while the liar will have to live with her betrayal for the rest of her life." Since the letter was officially sealed and sent from the prison addressed to my sister, she was the one who opened it, which caused an immediate suicide attempt. Our lawyers were not happy. To add final context, writing that letter was part of a rehabilitation class where inmates wrote letters to their victims to reflect on their crimes. The prison assured us it was never meant to be sent, that a mistake had been made, and they were unsure why the letter had been sent out. Story 3. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I was out playing when I saw a man beating a girl and dragging her by the hair through stinging nettles. She was crying, and they were fighting and arguing. My brother, who was 10 or 11, and I took her back home to my mum. It turned out my mum knew her. She was my dad's best friend's niece. She was a heroin addict and was most likely fighting her boyfriend over drugs or alcohol. I remember she looked terrible, with a bleeding nose, black eyes, and clumps of hair missing. She left, and I didn't hear from her for a while. Later, my mum told me she died in a neighboring town from a heroin overdose, along with the man who had beaten her. I am 32 now, and I still remember her. I was walking through the graveyard looking for my dad's brother's grave. He killed himself at 20, and accidentally stumbled across her grave. She was only 23 when she died, nearly 10 years younger than I am now. Many of my current friends can't believe I've never used drugs growing up, as I was surrounded by them on a council estate in the UK. She was one of the reasons I never touched drugs, along with another family friend who lived a few doors down. Both died from heroin overdoses when I was a child. I'm pretty sure my mum told me about it to warn me away from drugs, and it worked. Story 4. I worked at a charity event at a golf course. I was hired to make cocktails on the 9th hole. I overheard the vice president of Nestle bragging about hooking people on their products from birth to death. He said something like, "If you want to be a powerhouse in business, you have to take pride in your firing. The first thing you should do once you get the right position is seek out your hero in that company. Then fire him. Always fire your heroes. It feels great and lets people know that you mean business." It was just creepy to hear out loud. Story 5. There was a story about a monkey torture ring being shut down recently. They were buying monkeys on the black market and torturing them to death for money. Paying and profiting to inflict pain and death is likely the best way to condemn your soul to eternal suffering. Story 6. My job involves support and civil claims for victims of child abuse. Religious organizations enable sexual abuse against children and do everything in their power to protect the abusers. Additionally, grooming gangs targeted children as young as 7 and showed no remorse. Story 7. 2 years ago, a girl from my school was assaulted by 3 individuals and it was posted online. One of them committed suicide, and the other 2 fled the country. Most of my school has seen it, and she is living with severe depression and social anxiety. It is very sad. Story 8. Hi there, friend reading this. Just close the thread. Trust me. Story 9. I saw a child in my neighborhood use a sledgehammer on a turtle. It was so violent and unnecessary. Story 10. I saw a video of a man who had a type of fetish committing suicide by lowering himself like in a push-up stance onto a combat knife similar to Rambo in his garage. Besides that, reading the story interview with Anello was also quite disturbing. Story 11. I have read some of the research reports translated into English from Unit 731. They make the infamous Nazi medical experiments appear mild by comparison. Story 12. Local Rescue has just posted that someone took 3 kittens and smashed their heads in locally. Some of the things people do to dispose of unwanted young animals are horrible. We had a boy saved from the piano tattoo, where hunters in Spain take unwanted hunting animals and suspend them from ropes around their necks so their back paws just touch the ground, leaving them to suffocate slowly. Story 13. My mother allowed me to be abused me herself, and continues to deny it while pretending she is an upstanding member of society. Story 14. What drug-induced psychosis can make the sweetest people turn into. Story 15. I read this in a newspaper in Osaka in 2010. A mother with 2 children aged 1 and 3 years old. One day, she just packed up and left, leaving the children locked at home. A few weeks later, there was a bad stench, and police entered from the balcony and found the decomposing bodies of the children in the center of the room. It appeared as though they were comforting each other before they died of hunger. Neighbors said that about a week earlier, they heard the children crying out for their mother, but no one did anything. No one checked. I deeply regret that I could not unsee that. Correction to details I had forgotten but that were written in the papers. The online newspaper article did not say that they were hugging each other. That was from the original printed newspaper. She left them because she wanted to have some free time. Apparently, she had gone back to her house and found the decomposed bodies of her children, and then she left. Story 16. Watching someone argue with a self-checkout machine for not accepting their expired coupon. It is a wild world out there. Story 17. Fathers in poor countries kill their daughters or the mother because she is unable to produce an economically valuable son. Ironically, it is the father's sperm that determines the sex of the baby. Story 18. An 11-year-old came into my urgent care for abdominal pain. I had a gut feeling to do a pregnancy test, and it was positive. I had to tell her she was pregnant, and the father was a family member. The family was devout Catholic, so she kept the baby. The terror and heartbreak I saw in her eyes will stay with me forever. I was never able to follow up. I reported it to Child Protective Services, but nothing was ever done. I have reported many cases of child abuse to them and have never seen a child removed from their abusive parents. Working in healthcare is unbearable in general, and I could tell stories for days. Story 19. I work in mental health and have experience working with at-risk youth. I have encountered parents who dropped out of middle school, are not even 25 years old, have multiple children, use hard drugs, and live in unsafe motels. They often lie or physically abuse their children, although never in front of me. One of the worst situations, though we had no proof, involved dropping children off at a house where their uncle was very likely sexually abusing them. Story 20. 2 15-year-old kids were students of mine. They left my class early one day and did not return. Afterward, they went to a neighborhood near the school and broke into someone's home. The homeowner was there. He was an 83-year-old man with a fragile heart. He either had a heart attack and fell down the stairs or fell down the stairs and then had a heart attack. These boys, with baby faces, decided to dismember his body, shove it into coolers they found in the house, then took it to the local park and set it on fire. No, Johnny and Doug will not be at school tomorrow and will not be free to go anywhere until they turn 21. Story 21. That news story about the British crocodile expert who abused and tortured over 80 puppies and posted it online to other people who enjoy watching it. I was not able to sleep properly last night because of it. My faith in humanity lessens every day. Story 22. Anything that involves causing harm to children is pure evil. Story 23. My dad was abusing me from a very young age. He was one of the people you are supposed to trust the most in life. Story 24. The second time Child Protective Services was called on my mother. She threatened to kill me and my siblings rather than let Child Protective Services take us away. Unfortunately, this was said in private, and we were too scared to say anything, so Child Protective Services did not take us away. Child Protective Services was called on my mother a total of 4 times, and we were never taken away. Story 25. When I was 10, I watched nearly the whole school chase a boy around the playground because he had a funny haircut. It was not funny, he was terrified. What struck me was the teachers who stood in a row laughing. Yes, Auschwitz. Yes, Pol Pot. But this image from my childhood is always the first example of society's cruelty that comes to mind. Teachers laughing like that. Story 26. Family works as foster carers. Seeing the neglect these children endure from their parents is heartbreaking. It makes me question if having a child should require prior background checks to ensure eligibility to provide the necessary care. Some children come in with stunted development due to malnourishment, lack of attention, and being left in their cribs all day. Devoid of human interaction and muscle use, they are unable to grow properly, which causes lasting effects on their lives. It is simply sabotage to this innocent child, and still, these parents can have children who are immediately placed into protective services. Story 27. My ex was a really troubled person. Over time, I learned more and more about it. Besides the things she did to me in our relationship, one time in my old apartment late at night, we were making snacks for a movie night. We were laughing and joking, and she started talking about a story involving her brother, an ex of hers, and herself when she was a teenager. The 3 of them, in their teenage years, found a kitten near their house and put it into a microwave, testing different times on it. She described with glee how they started with a few seconds and gradually increased the durations, how the kitten started walking strangely, and then how the kitten exploded. She thought it was so funny. I remember being really disturbed by that. I blocked it out almost completely until after we broke up very badly, mind you. I cannot even begin to imagine having the mindset of someone who would find joy in such a despicable act. Story 28. A 6-month-old baby girl was brought into the emergency room where I work in full cardiac arrest and died shortly after. The parents would not tell us what happened and even refused to confirm the baby's date of birth or name. Ultimately, police discovered the baby had overdosed on heroin. The fact that the parents were more concerned about themselves possibly getting in trouble than their baby girl dying in front of them will stay with me for the rest of my life. Story 29. The dictator in our country is imprisoning people because they are trying to compete against him in the election. The dictator's supporters are happy because he is a strong man. The worst thing is that he deteriorated the economy with literally 0% growth last year, but they are okay with that. He is imprisoning activists, bloggers, politicians, and even ordinary people just because they write something against him on social media. People are ready to kill, imprison, and abuse others just because they do not agree with them. Maybe 15% of the population supports the dictator after the coup he made 3 years ago, but they are destroying the country very badly. When your country transforms into a dictatorship, you will see the worst side of the system. I was called to the police because I wrote something against the dictator. Every administration works for his personal goals, and every word against him is considered against the country. He will win the elections and lead us for another 5 years without hope or opportunity. But his supporters are happy. What is happening is extremely bad. Story 30. Social worker here who has worked in foster care, intensive behavioral health services, partial programs, community mental health. I could go on, but the situation that sticks out to me is when I was working in foster care and was assigned a 13-year-old girl. She had an intellectual disability and functioned more at an 8-year-old level. In her biological home, she and her 4 siblings were locked in separate rooms throughout the house. Their father would come home and go down the hall, assaulting each of his children. They could hear one another's cries and screams through the walls but could not intervene or comfort each other. Once he was done with each child, he would leave and lock the door behind him to repeat the same thing the next day. He was eventually caught when my client's younger sibling broke down and told their teacher. They were all placed in care but split up because it is difficult to place a sibling group of 5 together. Miraculously, all of them were able to be adopted around the same time. However, my client's first foster mother thought she was not thankful or grateful enough for all she did, So the girl went back into the system. This was all before I met her. I met her when she was placed with her second foster mother. Despite everything she had been through, she was one of my most beloved children who smiled brightly, laughed loudly, and danced confidently. Her ending, for those who want to know, she was eventually adopted, and her adoptive parents got her the Barbie dream house she had always wanted. Story 31. I'll share two experiences from my life in the mental health field. One involved a client I grew to like. She had gotten involved with a troubled group that met at the facility. She was trying to get her life together. The group members were either court-mandated or using the facility as a flophouse. She was infatuated with the leader of the group. They planned to leave together after one member was caught drinking and hiding alcohol. She was convinced to leave with them. I begged her to stay, expressing a bad feeling about the group. She had been doing well in the program. She understood my concerns but said, "I'm glad you care about me. You're a good man. I'll stay in touch and call the program so you all know I'm okay. Thank you for everything you've done for me, but I'm a big girl. I promise I'll be okay." Those were the last words she said to me. She had surgery about a month earlier and was on pain medication, which was allowed in the program. Her medication was not an issue. A week later, an argument broke out because some in the group wanted to use her pain medication to get high. She refused. The others went down to the basement while she went to bed. They began using meth. They later came back and attacked her in her sleep, fracturing her skull with a pipe from the basement. They dragged her body downstairs and tried to dismember her with a saw but failed. They wrapped most of her body in a carpet and dumped it on the side of the highway during the first big storm of winter. The smaller portion was placed in a trash bag and dumped out of state. I heard of her disappearance within 2 weeks. Some of those offenders returned to the program within 6 or 7 months and fabricated an obviously false story. We could not prove otherwise. Unknowingly, I drove past her body nearly every weekend for months. If I had stopped at the right spot, I would have been just feet away. The snow hid it for months. She was found in spring while cleaning up roadside garbage. A mother, a daughter, a friend, and a decent person was discarded like trash. They all received life sentences without parole, except for one woman who cooperated against the others. She was smiling in her mugshot. The second story is shorter and in the same city. My roommate and I woke one morning to police surrounding the building next door. Detectives in peacoats and suits were everywhere. A man living in the basement apartment murdered a woman, dismembered her, and stuffed her into a footlocker. We saw officers carry it out, blood streaming down the side. Flesh was pressing against the lid where the latch had broken. It was shocking to witness at 8 a.m. on a Sunday. We were awake the entire time it happened, barely 20 feet away, but heard no sound. Now that these memories are coming back, I realize there are many more stories like this. I try to believe in the good in people, but humans are capable of cruelty and evil unique to us. The depths of it are not something to stare into for long. Story 32. When I was deployed to Iraq, the otherwise seemingly really cool E9 sergeant started telling me about the 0 Dark 30 kind of incidents that used to happen in the facility where I occasionally worked because I asked him about a room written on a breaker box. "Oh, that room doesn't exist anymore. That's where we used to," he said, like a proud father telling me about the achievements of his children. Story 33. I did not personally see it, but I read an account of what a former high school classmate experienced at the hands of a serial killer. She was a shy, sweet girl who died a most gruesome death imaginable. Story 34. r/watch people be back when that subreddit was active. I don't really like being a human anymore. Story 35. I haven't seen it firsthand, but I read Hell.com by Patrick Senecal, which is apparently based on true stories. It explores the dark side of humanity with an underground dark web where you can get almost anything, including sex trafficking. It was a good book, but definitely not an easy read. Story 36. I went to a small high school with fewer than 200 students. I mention this because when 2 boys disappeared without a trace, it was something everyone noticed. The staff remained tight-lipped. Months later, we learned that the 2 boys, along with one of their fathers, had been having consensual, yes, I emphasize consensual for a reason, sexual relations with one of their sisters for at least a year. Then one day she refused, and the situation escalated severely. I never saw the girl again. She was placed in a home for abuse victims. I hope all three face justice. Story 37. Older men on Twitter replying to 9 to 13-year-olds who were advertising themselves as Asian American models. If you know, you know. Sick world we live in. Reported dozens of these. Nothing was ever done about it. Story 38. Having worked with individuals who have intellectual disabilities and taking them on outings such as baseball games and McDonald's, I have heard people whisper the most hateful things about some of the kindest people in the world. Story 39. I went into the Atlanta Constitution building, which has been abandoned for nearly 40 years in the middle of Atlanta. The police put out word that everyone needed to clear out. The Special Weapons and Tactics team and fire department had to clear the building and make paths for us to conduct an engineering assessment. We had to wear gloves, protective suits, rubber boots, and respirators to enter the building. Once inside, I could see why. Over 30 to 40 years, the place was only abandoned by the owners, but dozens of people were living there with no water, power, or waste disposal. There were mounds of trash and feces 8 feet high, filling entire rooms. You could see where some poor soul had a couple of pallets, a sleeping bag, a bucket of waste, and a few pots they cooked with. The basement was a flooded lake of garbage, and the first few floors were dark and disgusting. As you went up, it was more like drug dens with broken liquor bottles, crack pipes, used condoms, and needles everywhere. It was like an apocalypse happened decades ago. Story 40. I think the darkest thing I have witnessed is the subtle, slow-burning hatred of an adult toward a child over the span of 30 years, with that child now being an adult. Story 41. I don't know about darkest, but it's got me down today. There's a dog hanging around the apartments that my neighbor has been feeding. My dog would chase him every time I took the dogs outside. He was a sweetie, big dog, but you can tell he's just a lost puppy. For the last few days, I have been trying to get him to come up to me. He was too scared but kept coming up to about 3 steps away, wagging his little tail but too nervous to let me pet him. I sat outside and played my ukulele for almost an hour last night, trying to get him to come up to me. He almost did but ran off right before he got to me. I went outside this morning, and he had been hit by a car and was lying still in the road. I really don't like the world right now. My wife and I are looking for a bigger place to live, and we were hoping to take him with us because he was such a sweet puppy. I can't believe there are people who could hit a dog and just keep driving. Story 42. I guess it doesn't really count as seeing firsthand, but I had to take Oklahoma history in high school and college. There is the Trail of Tears, the Tulsa race riots, the Osage murders, and residential schools. Story 43. 20-year Child Protective Services veteran. Too many child fatalities to list, but the worst person I have ever met owned a chain of liquor stores. He would hire young single mothers with young children and begin relationships with them. He moved them into his massive house with a pool, all-terrain vehicles, and ATV paths, just every toy imaginable. Then he would molest the kids as long as they were nonverbal. Just before the child was old enough to report what was happening, he would break up with the mother and kick them all out. If the mother had concerns before the child could report it, he would threaten to take away all the lavish perks she and her children had become used to. Finally, we got a break when an older child was able to report what happened to his younger brother. We were excited, thinking we finally had the perpetrator. The detective was preparing to seek a search warrant, and a sexual assault nurse examiner exam was scheduled. Then the mother failed to show up for the exam and stopped responding to calls or texts. Later, we received a voicemail from the mother saying her son admitted to lying and that she had moved out of state. The detective later showed me a photo from her social media indicating she had enough funds not only to move, but also to buy a new SUV. Typing this out, I am not sure whether the man or the mother was worse. Story 44. My biological father, whom I am adopted from but knew intermittently throughout my childhood, raped me and got me pregnant in a desperate attempt to groom me into the perfect little housewife for himself. He began trying to groom me into that role as early as 3 years old, but no one noticed. I was 14 when my daughter was conceived. She passed at birth, and I have lifelong fertility issues because of everything. I lost another child and many early pregnancies as an adult due to these fertility issues. I have to relive the abuse and losses every time I explain my medical history. I genuinely believe my biological father would kill me if given the chance because I married another man and had his children. He tried to murder an ex-partner and is the reason I lost my firstborn. As I said, I would never allow him near her. This is a major reason I moved far away at the first opportunity, as I had lived in fear for years. My biological father hoped I would have daughters for him to groom. He had many children deliberately. Thankfully, I am the only girl. Otherwise, my siblings would have suffered as well. He abandoned all his sons and lost custody of me separately, though I was the only child he wanted, as he said he only ever wanted daughters. He has never faced prison for any of his crimes against me. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder from everything, and what he did haunts every aspect of my life. Story 45. I am ready to join a team to bring to justice those who harm children. Story 46. I was behind a car full of teenagers driving recklessly. Two loose dogs ran into the street, and the driver sped up, aiming right at one of them. The poor boy lay in the middle of the road for about 30 minutes before he finally died. Story 47. There was a mentally challenged man in my family, and the family took turns taking care of him. He had his own apartment and was functional enough to work at Kroger. We would check on him and bring him food. Some people pretended to befriend him to talk him into giving them his belongings, such as his television and furniture, which the family had bought for him. I was just a kid when it happened and was bewildered that no one tried to do anything. They just bought him new items and moved on. Call me vengeful, but I would have gathered some friends to find those people. Story 48. Watching a person's skull get hit with a crowbar at a Proud Boys rally in downtown Portland in 2019. I was working outside a hotel and had to help the person and call emergency services. While on the phone, another person ran by us and sprayed bear spray. Felt like a war. Story 49. I watch quite a bit of cartel footage, and when you see a man have his face severed and his beating heart cut out and held by his executioner, sometimes you wonder what God is going on that is so important he cannot come to the phone right now. Story 50. My previous 7-year career led me to some very dark places. I witnessed people overdosing in front of me, murder victims including children, driving under the influence incidents with fatalities often involving children, child abuse, child neglect, self-abuse, self-neglect, and more. I suppose it involves thinking you have it bad in some aspects of life, then stepping into someone else's world for an hour or two. Story 51. I work as a pediatric nurse. I see a lot, and I mean a lot, of neglected children. One case that really stuck with me was an 8-day-old baby. The mother admitted to absolutely no prenatal care. She had been admitted months prior due to a drug overdose while pregnant. The mother admitted to using methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, and alcohol during pregnancy. She was also found to be syphilis positive during the previous admission and refused any treatment, even though congenital syphilis can be detrimental or fatal. She had the baby and showed no concern that her child was withdrawing from drugs. It turns out she had 6 other children who are all now in the system. She literally said to the social worker, "Just take him like the others." My heart broke looking at this little baby, who was miraculously very healthy and showed no signs of withdrawal or congenital syphilis, which is rare in only 8-day-old newborns with a history like his. I usually do not get affected by the social issues of my patients, but I kept looking at this sweet, precious baby and thinking, "You are going to have a very hard life. I am so sorry." The mother had no remorse for having all these children while taking drugs, drinking, and being sexually transmitted infection positive. I understand addiction is a terrible disease. I work in a rough part of my city and see it every day. But the true lack of remorse or care for any of her children absolutely baffles me. Story 52. Men who have snuff movies made of them so they masturbate while watching a girl being beaten and killed. It is very disturbing. Story 53. A friend of mine tried to kill me for drug money. In North America, it is a social taboo to be critical of drug addicts, but some of them will kill you for enough drugs to kill themselves. It is tragic. Story 54. My brother-in-law sold his mother's house without permission and without giving her any money while she was living in it. Story 55. I worked in hospice for 10 years and witnessed terrible cruelty. Adult children neglected their elderly and infirm parents, letting them lie in feces and urine, not feeding them or giving pain relievers except when they knew Adult Protective Services was coming to inspect. They cheerfully cashed their Social Security and pension checks every month and refused to sign do not resuscitate orders because as soon as the parent died, the financial support stopped. They kept the parent alive against their will for financial reasons. When we finally convinced Adult Protective Services to come unannounced, they confirmed that all our calls for neglect were substantiated. The parent was removed from the home, placed in a skilled nursing facility, and the checks were used to cover the costs of care. The adult child never made any attempt to call, send a card, or visit for the next year and a half until the parent eventually died alone and broke. It was the saddest thing I have ever seen and broke my heart every time I visited. Story 56. Worked at an animal shelter. A cat came in as part of a court case. A lawyer brought a little boy to visit the cat. The boy had watched his father beat his brother to death. Later, his foster mother brought him to see the cat. She confessed to me that she did not want the boy at her house. She only took him because she was trying to adopt a foster baby. I had to tell the lawyer to get him moved. Story 57. How easy it is for someone determined to destroy your life to actually destroy your life and get away with it. It is hard to believe karma is real, not gonna lie. Story 58. I had a couple of mental health crises in 2015. Subsequently, I spent time in jails in Oklahoma and Arizona. There is a shockingly dark streak of evil that runs through law enforcement, including both police officers and detention officers. Story 59. Small gypsy girl in Romania with her hand cut off by her family for sympathy when begging for money. Stitches were still fresh. Story 60. Personally seen my childhood. Growing up obviously gay with an overbearing, extremely religious Catholic mother, and a father only slightly less so. Both were physically and emotionally abusive. I was locked in closets and withheld food unless I studied the Bible daily. Attended Jesus camp, which was really just an indoctrination camp. Experienced conversion therapy. The congregation, as far as I know, looked the other way, so there was nobody to turn to, not that I knew any better. On the morning of my 18th birthday, I was forcefully kicked out of the house without even a change of clothes and lived in a rundown, used car for 2.5 months. I will be 41 later this month, have been married for 6 years in November, and am still going to therapy and taking medication for depression, attempted suicide, and post-traumatic stress disorder. People wonder why I am not keen on religion. Story 61. I was a firefighter for several years until I broke my back. During the time I worked, I saw some difficult situations. Most of the incidents didn't bother me too much. Generally, if we responded to a scene involving adults who made poor decisions and got hurt as a result, there was little sympathy because they were responsible for themselves. Of course, if someone was an innocent victim, that was a different matter. The worst situations usually involve children. I once responded to a home where the uncle who called emergency services only spoke Tagalog. The reason for the call was unclear. When we arrived, the uncle was holding his roughly 2-year-old niece wrapped in a blanket. She was upset and clearly had been crying. None of our crew spoke Tagalog, so we called in someone who did. The uncle handed the little girl to the medic. When we unwrapped her, about 50 to 60% of her skin from mid-chest downward was hanging off, with 2nd and 3rd degree burns. The medic and I took her to the bathroom tub. I ran to the engine to get all the sterile saline we had, about 6 to 8 quarts. The captain called for an ambulance. We gloved up and began washing her wounds. Her screams were the most piercing I have ever heard. My heart broke, but it was necessary to reduce the risk of infection quickly. The ambulance crew arrived and took over with more saline and care. They wrapped her in sterile dressings. The burn center was notified, and the local hospital prepared a life flight to take her about 60 miles away. Police arrived, and a firefighter who spoke Tagalog joined us. We learned the uncle had been making lunch, and the little girl had been playing and bothering him. In frustration, he threw a pot of boiling water on her. The police were furious and handled him roughly. The mother arrived, hysterical and cursing the uncle in Tagalog. It was a total chaos. Interestingly, at the time, I was 6 feet tall and 220 pounds, and of all the firefighters and police present, I was the smallest. The uncle was a small man, about 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 6 inches and 130 to 140 pounds, surrounded by angry, much larger men. He likely thought he was going to be killed. Another call was in a rough part of town, a third-floor apartment, a medical call. When we arrived, a young woman in her early 20s was on the floor in the fetal position, sobbing and clutching her abdomen in pain. Police were right behind us, so we knew the situation would be difficult. We could not get her to relax or open up because of her position, but it was clear she was at least 6 to 7 months pregnant. I went to get the stair chair, which is like a stroller with wheels designed to carry people downstairs with 2 operators. The police were questioning everyone. We tried to get the woman onto the chair without causing more pain. About half of the 6 or so police officers were leaving, and one of them told us the woman's boyfriend, a known repeat offender, had been involved in a fight with her. He punched her, she fell to the ground, and then he kicked her in the stomach. I was shocked. The police were already pursuing him after a dispatch call ordered a "be on the lookout." Eventually, we got her down the stairs and transferred her to the ambulance. Fortunately, there was no visible bleeding. Medics thought they heard a fetal heartbeat, but it was outside our scope and the scene was loud. Although we are not pediatricians or obstetricians, this information helped the woman relax. We all felt a bit of relief. I could go on with many stories. Even after only a few years doing this work, I was deeply affected. After breaking my back, depression really took hold because I could no longer help in the ways I once did. When I was working, I felt like I was contributing in some small way. For about a year, I struggled to take care of myself and needed help with basic tasks. Physically, I am doing quite well now. I go to the gym, can run, and do most of the activities I used to. However, I would never be able to pass a fire department physical, and with my medical history, I would not be hired again. Story 62. Worked in a homeless shelter and heard about the darkest experiences from men who endured abuse during their childhood. Story 63. Last November, I was walking to my gym when I heard a loud thud behind me. I turned around and saw a man lying halfway on the street and a car coming to a stop. The man had been hit by the car. I ran over to him. He got up in a daze, bleeding profusely, and began walking down the road while I called emergency services. The driver got out and asked me what I was doing. When I told him I was on the phone with emergency services, he got in his car and drove away. I couldn't get a license plate number. Luckily, the paramedics arrived quickly, but I never forgot about the driver who just left. He didn't even seem startled by what happened. He was cold throughout the whole ordeal. Story 64. In dealing with an eBay return on a shirt we sold to a woman, she demanded a return after finding a mark indicating it was from a secondhand store. In her request, she explained why she did not want the garment. Worse were her accusations that secondhand stores only sell to certain types of people. We tried reasoning with her because we source from many different places, but she became more hostile, making terrible generalizations. We fulfilled her return but also reported her to eBay for the offensive language she used. The representative barely read the first message we sent as evidence and paused in shock, then politely said, "Oh no, I see what you mean." We were told she was banned from eBay within minutes. Most people are good, but there are some terrible, vile individuals out there. Story 65. Forensic rotation in my clinical psychology program. I participated in an interview with a serial rapist. It was not the detailed description of his actions that stood out, but the brutal hollowness with which he conveyed them. He recounted his crimes minute by minute as if sharing a personal recipe for brownies. It meant nothing to him. Story 66. Also, people protesting for their right to sexually abuse children because apparently that is a thing. Story 67. A man is asking his child to lie about how his wife, their mother, died in order to receive more insurance money a few months after the funeral. Story 68. When I was 14 years old, I visited a website similar to Omegle. It was very unknown with around 30 people active. While there, I made genuine connections and was then surprised to see a video involving child pornography. It was disgusting, and the man showing it to me thought I was younger, so he gave me the links. I reported them all anonymously to the Federal Bureau of Investigation website. Safe to say, I never visited that website again. Story 69. There was a case in my country about a boy around 8 years old named Ramoncito, or Ramon, from Corrientes province. The boy was homeless, and one day, while asking for money, an Umbanda sect kidnapped him. They later tortured him to death for a ritual. They did many horrible things to him while he was still alive, which changed my view of the world when I saw the real images by accident at around 14 years old. People can be horrible. Rest in peace to that little boy. Story 70. I found out that my dad was that uncle in the family. He abused his own sister and many other women and children. When I was a baby, my mom accused him of molesting me. They went to court and I was placed in foster care for a year and a half while they figured it out. He won full custody and has always maintained that he was innocent. Now I'm not sure. I don't remember anything, but my childhood is mostly blank. The dark side of humanity is shown by our family. It was well known that he was a creep, a liar, and a thief. But no one testified against him. No one ever asked me anything. Yesterday, I shared this truth, and some family members deleted or blocked me because, to them, nothing is more intolerable than a child who disrespects their parents. They have protected predators for generations, and when the victims speak, we are shunned. Story 71. A friend's friend, Liz, was raped. Our college's Title IX office told her she could be sued for defamation if she mentioned her rapist's name or even discussed the incident, despite the fact that Liz was clearly raped. Story 72. The statistics on roadkill show that it is mostly men who hit animals, and it is often intentional. Story 73. I was almost shot by a terrorist and was unfortunate enough to see the bodies before they were zipped into body bags. Story 74. If I remember correctly, a girl in Japan was kidnapped by a group of men who repeatedly assaulted her several times a day. She was underage and was reported dead some time later. Story 75. The child smoking 10,000 vapes per day to test their flavor was wild. A lot worse out there though. Story 76. Being groomed online. I thought my manipulator loved me, but it was all love bombing and manipulation to get me to open up and satisfy their fetish, which I will not say. Took me around 2 years to realize it was grooming, as I thought it was all my fault. Thank God I know it is not. Story 77. When I was 14, on the internet on Microsoft Comic Chat, someone sent me a picture and a video. I opened both at the same time. The video showed a man engaging in inappropriate acts with a baby about 3 months old, and the picture was of the aftermath. I never used Comic Chat again. I never told my parents because I thought the Federal Bureau of Investigation was going to come for me any day. Story 78. When I was 11, my martial arts instructor would have some of the advanced students come to his house to help him in his garden. Many different young men came and went, but eventually it was just me and another boy left. The instructor had the other boy start rubbing his shoulders when we were taking a break. I remember they were both looking at me with intense stares, and the instructor was moaning. Something twisted in my stomach, and I quickly walked away to a corner of the yard and kept digging the ditch or whatever I was doing. I think I blocked it out in my mind because thinking back on it, I can't believe I didn't recognize it for what it was and say something. I even went back to his house multiple times after that. Nothing like that ever happened again. But a couple of years later, he was arrested for having sex with that boy and had been for a while, so I guess he was trying to involve me. He is now serving a sentence as a sex offender. Story 79. Oprah once endorsed a cult leader who used women as baby factories. Story 80. Let's see. Law enforcement here. A person committed murder and then strung the entrails in the front yard tree. A man tried to rape a baby, but it would not fit, so he sliced the babies to make it fit. The man cut off his penis and ate it to commit suicide. There were too many beatings to count. Mexican cartels are doing awful things. Elder abuse is common. Cannibalism is more prevalent than you think. Animal abuse is so severe it would make you sob. I was an animal warden when regular people discovered what dog fighting entails. And those are the easier cases. It is a dark place. Story 81. Being kidnapped and forcibly and violently raped as a 10-year-old boy, and then having to endure weeks of being pulled out of class during the school day by police to look through book after book of mugshots, without ever seeing the perpetrator's face, is a trauma I still clearly remember decades later. My parents did absolutely nothing for me. I asked my mother once why she never sought help for me, and she told me that when I said I didn't want to talk about it, she assumed I was okay. No 10-year-old wants to talk about being raped, but they all need help. Story 82. I was born into a sex cult. When I tell you it gets bad, it gets bad. I was about 6 or 7 years old and had already been sexually abused prior to this. The kids' rooms had old technology because we were only allowed to watch the tapes we had created or ones that the head of the house allowed us to have. So, while curious and bored, I rummaged through a box of old tapes and found a handful that were rubber banded together. Some were titled, others were not, and the titles had no context to the actual tapes. I played them on our old television. The tapes were filled with footage of me, from newborn to about 1 year old, being molested by multiple people of different ages in front of my parents. My parents participated. That's when I really woke up and knew I hated the place. I was very young at the time, but in that environment, I was already mentally an adult. Story 83. The fact that 2 people have been convicted of trafficking people and sentenced to prison, 1 person allegedly dead, and yet the judge and the court system to this day will not release the list because it will harm people. Release the Epstein client list. Story 84. I have been in psychiatric wards due to developing schizophrenia at 17. I went to around 6 wards all over West Virginia and saw how poorly treated the mentally disabled people were. They were not included in anything and were not given equity to make their stay safe and rehabilitative. I also saw many nurses treat patients poorly by saying, "It is not my job," whenever they were asked to help with something, even though it was their responsibility. Another example is a nurse telling me I should be thankful for the clothes I was given, even though clothes are a necessity, and I should thank her for doing her job. More empathetic people need to run the mental health units. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.